San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Google caught not disclosing a software glitch that left the data of hundreds of thousands of users exposed. How it happened and how regulators may respond ahead. Plus, Facebook's taking on Amazon and Google with a new smart speaker optimized for video chat. But do consumers want Facebook in their living rooms after a string of privacy scandals? And the United Nations is painting a grim picture of the world's climate future with a big price tag attached to slowing down global warming. We'll talk about how technology can play a role in saving the planet. But first, to our top story, Google is shutting down its Google Plus platform for consumers after discovering a bug in one of the APIs that could potentially have exposed the private data of hundreds of thousands of users. Despite discovering this bug months ago, Google chose not to disclose the issue until now. Shares of parent company Alphabet fell after the Wall Street Journal initially reported the security breach. For more, I want to bring in our Bloomberg tech reporter, Garrett DeVink from New York. So, Garrett, first of all, Google Plus is essentially defunct. How exactly did this happen?
You're right, it is essentially defunct, and Google admitted in its own statement that user engagement was very, very low, as this is something we as consumers all know. We probably downloaded Google Plus for a hot minute several years ago and have never gone back to it. But what happened is, the profiles of hundreds of thousands of people are still on Google Plus, of course, and this specific API allowed a developer to request a view of certain pieces of user information. So this would have included your name, your email address. There wasn't sort of private messages that were sent between users. That's not exposed according to Google, but some of that sort of basic identifying information was just sort of out there and open for any developers who had access to this API and had figured this out to request it.
So what can you tell us a little bit about the timeline in terms of when they realized this and when they decided, at least as the reporting goes, not to share it with the public?
So we all know that obviously there's been this sort of firestorm of interest in privacy, data security at the big tech companies over the last year or 2 years, especially when it comes to Facebook. And so in January of this year, January 2018, Google internally decided to do a major security and data privacy review of all its products. They wanted to make sure that this exact kind of thing wasn't out there unbeknownst to them. And this is something that they found in March 2018. So this was right when Facebook was bearing the brunt of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right around the time that Mark Zuckerberg was hauled in front of Congress to explain his company's actions. And internally, Google decided not to put that out there. That's something that they've admitted that they found it in March 2018, decided at the time that they didn't feel it was necessary to tell the public. The Wall Street Journal is reporting, citing their sources, that Google made that decision because of the political pressure that they'd seen out in the space at the time.
So how will this ratchet up the political pressure? I mean, Google has already been smarting for not sending someone to testify. A few weeks ago, when Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, and Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, went to testify, he is now scheduled to testify before Congress at some point in the coming weeks. How do you expect lawmakers will take to this? I
mean, lawmakers are going to jump on this just like they've jumped on every issue that not just Google but other tech companies have sort of had over the past couple of years. Google has been getting a lot of attention in the last couple months. Before that, they had, although had faced some criticism, they'd been kind of able to skate above the worst of it that had been reserved for Facebook and Twitter. But now they're really at the center of it. The president tweeted about a month and a half ago that that Google was only showing negative news about his presidency. He was very upset about that. Conservative politicians have said that Google has a liberal bias, that they are suppressing liberal opinions on Google News and on YouTube, and that they want that to change. Of course, there's no evidence that this is happening. Google continues to push back against it, but it doesn't seem to be going away. Google is continuing to be, a topic that politicians like to talk about. And as we head into the midterms, especially on the Republican side, it seems that this company, Facebook as well, Twitter as well, but Google's right in sort of the focus right now, is a way for them to get their voters out. So they're sending messages to their voters, to their conservative voters, that Google is a big bad technology company from California that isn't respectful of your privacy and is trying to shape the country towards a more liberal position. And this is something that seems to be gaining traction with some voters. It doesn't look like it's an issue that's going to go away for Google.
what exactly do we know about the date of Sundar Pichai's testimony and the substance of it?
That's still sort of being sorted out right now. I personally don't have a lot of information on exactly what that's going to look like, but of course, especially with this news, it just adds another thing that he's going to have to talk about.
All right, Bloomberg Tech's Garrett DeVink, thanks so much for weighing in New York today. Now, Facebook is going head-to-head with Amazon and Google with its first ever smart speaker. It's called Portal, and it comes with a display optimized for video chat. Portal and its larger alternative, Portal Plus, are designed to simplify video chatting and can track and follow your movement. So if you move, so does the camera. Rather than constantly adjusting a phone or a tablet, Portal automatically identifies people in the room and keeps them in frame. Consumers have bought into similar devices like the Amazon Echo Show. But with Facebook's recent privacy scandals, will Portal be considered creepy or convenient? Joining us now to discuss, Vice President of Portal, Rafa Camargo. Rafa, thank you so much for joining us. So, I mean, you know about the context and the conversation happening right now in which this is being released. So we'll go there. But first of all, tell me, how does it work and what sets it apart from Amazon and Google and what they have already on the market?
This is really a new platform that we designed from the ground up to help you connect with the people you care the most about. And what we mean by that is video calling today has a lot of friction. I think everyone has experienced that. So we wanted to get you from feeling that you're in a call to really feeling that you're together, you're in the same space with the people that you care the most about.
So it sounds great, and agreed, there is a lot of friction with video calling, but are people really ready for Facebook to be the device maker in their living room after all of the trust issues that have come up in the last couple of years?
We provide a lot of value with the device. It's not just the video presence that we call the new generation of video calling technology, but it's also a great speaker, it's a great video player device, and it also incorporates Alexa as a general home assistant. But obviously it's a device for your home, so privacy is paramount and very important. And we designed privacy from the ground up. The fact that we had to build the hardware and the software to really change the way people communicate allowed us actually to put privacy on every layer of the stack.
So how does this work? I mean, when it's off, is it still on? Is it still listening? You know, when I don't want it to be? And where does that data go?
No. The only time that actually video is leaving your device is when you're in a call, when you're connected to basically your loved ones on the other side, and that is encrypted. All the smart camera feature that we talked about that really keeps you in frame, pans and zooms, makes you a completely hands-free experience, and essentially just makes you feel that you're there. All that AI is actually running locally on the device, and that's really industry leading.
So any data that it collects about me is encrypted? Any data at all, or just the video?
Is the video leaving the device? We don't do any recording, and sure, we get call logs, but similar to what you get in Messenger. It's built on Messenger. It really interoperates with mobile. You can call to anyone out of the box that you're connected to in Messenger, and you just keep call logs so that we can basically give you a better service and measure really the use of our network so we can dimension the network properly.
Is audio encrypted as well?
The audio for the video calls is encrypted. When you can also communicate with the device via voice to make control the device, mainly through Alexa. That's also encrypted. It's a channel to Alexa, and it works similarly to any other Alexa device.
But Facebook has the call logs, essentially.
We have the call logs. Nothing new. It's the same thing that when you do Messenger calls or when you do calls on any other calling device or service.
So, I mean, we just heard the conversation earlier, and certainly you're well aware that there are some people who might push back on this, who might not feel comfortable for this. Why did you guys decide to release this now, in the middle of this sort of uproar about privacy?
I mean, for us, it's about really helping people connect to the people they care the most about. Traditionally, Facebook has focused a lot on the breadth of connection. We connect more than 2 billion people in our platform. Increasingly, we've been looking at the depth of that connection. How can we give you more value? And this is all about really not basically just getting you into a call, but make you feeling like you're there. With the device. So the value to us is really help you connect with the people you care the most about.
Can WhatsApp users use this?
In the future, we will look at integrating it. We're launching first in the US, where Messenger is really the dominant network. As we launch internationally, we'll integrate with WhatsApp as well.
How long have you been working on this?
We've been working with a little bit less than 2 years.
So, what's the goal? Is the goal to, take share from Amazon or Google? Is the goal to somehow, tie us in even more to the Facebook ecosystem?
The ultimate goal, really, for us, for our users, is to help you not just connect, but to make you feel connected to the people you care about. So in that sense, it's really adding that depth of dimension to the platform and the services that we provide.
Now, we talked about what Facebook is doing to make sure the data is encrypted, but what about safeguarding it from potential hack attacks? So something that you may not intend to happen, how do you prevent that from happening?
The device at launch is closed. We're only getting, it has applications, but the applications are only by invitation with early partners that we work with. And obviously we're doing all the tests possible with regards to security on the device.
So what's next? I mean, where do you hope this goes?
We hope this changes the way people connect to their really loved ones by making distance disappear and helping you really maintain those relationships with the day-to-day feeling together, seeing each other face to face, and getting connected.
Do you see an Oculus tie-in in the future ahead as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in general, we're looking at that and how what we call social presence. Our product is very focused on what we call video presence. You can also see how it connects with people that might be hanging out on Oculus, and then you can hang out on your portal. So those are things that we will look at in the future.
All right, Facebook Vice President of Portal, Rafa Camargo, thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily.
For stopping by. Thank you. Up next, the latest climate change report from the UN is a disturbing read, giving the planet a much steeper timeline to arrest global warming. We'll talk about how the role of tech and how tech can play a bigger role in saving the planet next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. The latest climate report from the United Nations paints a grim picture. The world is teetering on the edge of failure when it comes to containing global warming, and the solution comes at a cost. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says the world must invest $2.4 trillion into clean energy every year through 2035, and cut the use of coal-fired power to almost nothing by 2050, just to avoid catastrophic damage from climate change. The report notes the atmosphere is already 1 degree Celsius warmer than it was at the start of the Industrial Revolution, and predicts that will rise to 3 degrees by 2100. That is double the pace targeted in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. So, will technology be able to help save the planet? To discuss, we're joined by our Bloomberg News sustainability editor, Eric Roston, in New York. And here in the studio, I have Emily Mazzacurati, who is an expert in climate adaptation and resilience, and the founder and CEO of 427, a provider of market intelligence on climate change. So, Eric, I want to start with you. Can you just set the stage for us? Walk us through the numbers here. And is such a price tag actually achievable?
We'll see, certainly. This is the report that was commissioned by the UN 2 years ago after the Paris Accords. And it doesn't deliver great news. It presents a very strict timeline that we have to reduce global emissions before 2030. They suggest that on something on the order of 55 or 60% cuts in global emissions below last year levels by 2030. And then zeroing out emissions by 2050. So that is a huge challenge and represents ambition we have not yet seen, even from the nations that were so supportive of the Paris Agreement 3 years ago.
Emily, what's your take on these numbers?
Well, the technology is there to reduce emissions, but we haven't been deploying it at scale. We haven't been investing enough. And what the report points out as well is that to keep emissions under a level that would limit the impacts of climate change, we need to capture a lot of carbon emissions, and this is technology that is not ready at scale.
So talk to us about how we get there. I mean, what's it going to take for that technology to be ready?
Well, for technology to be useful, someone needs to turn it on, and nobody has turned on the technology at this point to the scale that is needed. We don't have the political will, certainly not in the US, but even in other countries, it's not moving fast enough. And we don't have the investments to follow suit. The technology is there for carbon-free energy, for reducing emissions across a number of activities, and also for preparing and adapting to climate change. We're just not using it.
So
right
who
now.
needs to turn it on? I mean, who are the people who can make this happen and the companies that can make this happen?
Right. So the obvious answer is governments, but governments may not be there yet. So there's a lot going on in the private sector, and there has been a lot of mobilization from investors and from corporations to invest. That needs to come with a regulatory push. It can't just be all one, because the companies that are pushing this type of effort are still a minority compared to the broader set of corporations out there.
Right. Eric, what's the likelihood that big tech or big business could do some of this on their own?
We already see really hopeful stories from around the world of enormous investment in technologies that have matured in some ways faster than even close watchers of the space would have believed, particularly in solar, in wind power, and the electrification of automobiles. I'd like to echo Emily's point about the carbon capture technologies. These are very interesting projects that are getting a lot of attention and some money. But one thing that's worth considering, we also saw today the awarding of the 2018 Nobel Prize in Economics to William Nordhaus of Yale University. And he's spent most of the last 3 or 4 decades trying to understand the relationship between what cost of pollution is, what is the appropriate price for a ton of emissions, with the consequent reduction in emissions. And so many economists will tell you that people respond to prices, people respond to incentives, and having a price on carbon, the economists will tell you, and there are many experiments around the world, may be needed to get these technologies up and running in time to meet the challenges outlined today in the report.
Emily, what are the consequences if this stuff doesn't happen?
Well,
what is the difference between 1 degree Celsius and 3 degrees Celsius?
We're already seeing the consequences of not having done our homework before, and we're seeing it today. We're seeing it with extreme weather events, a new hurricane barreling down Florida. Japan just had 9 typhoons in the past season, which is insane when you think of it. So the impacts are already there. They're only going to get worse, and a half-degree difference between 1.5 Celsius degree by 2040 or 2 degrees make a tremendous difference. This is the average across the entire Earth, and so you have to imagine the amount of changes that need to happen to move the needle by half a degree globally. And that means more extreme weather events. That means water scarcity. That means more wildfires. That means sea level rise and losing our coastlines. That means a tremendous amount of impact that we're not currently adequately prepared for.
Eric, meantime, you've got some big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, teaming up to develop AI to identify impending famine. Talk to us about how this works.
That was it's a very interesting project that was announced today by those particular tech leaders. And the goal of that project is to look for natural and social metrics that when certain alarm bells go off among each of them, it may be an overall early warning signal, could be interpreted as an overall early warning signal for famine. One thing that's interesting and gets lost in our sort of voluminous talk every day about big data and AI is that climate and weather were sort of the original big data topics going back to the 1960s. Pattern recognition and machine learning in some ways cut their teeth very early on these topics. And so 4 or 5 decades later now, what we're seeing is this really interesting marriage of highly sophisticated, highly advanced, cutting-edge AI being applied to sort of less cutting-edge, sort of kludgy, government-supported models that evolved over the last few decades, and that combination of this old approach to modeling with these new AI tools is producing some really interesting startups at exactly the time we're going to need them most.
All right, fascinating stuff. Bloomberg's Eric Roston and 427 CEO Emily Mazzacurati, thank you both for joining. We should note that Michael Bloomberg, founder and majority owner of Bloomberg News and its parent company, Bloomberg LP, is a UN Special Envoy for Climate Action. Well, Bloomberg Tech, live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. Be sure to follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. More coming up. This is Bloomberg. Elon Musk's SpaceX is having the type of steady success that has eluded him at Tesla. The company's 17th launch of the year inserted an Argentine satellite into orbit. The rocket's first stage returned to Earth and landed at Central California's Vandenberg Air Force Base. SpaceX completed a record 18 missions last year and is on track to exceed that in 2018. Private equity firm Bain Capital has agreed to buy a majority stake in closely held Rocket Software. The deal is valued at about $2 billion, including debt. Rocket offers tech services to companies using IBM products. The deal will allow it to increase spending on research and development. Rocket is owned by Court Square Capital Partners. And CoinFloor will cut staff as the UK Bitcoin exchange restructures its operations amid a sell-off in cryptocurrencies. Financial News reported on Monday that the London-based exchange will cut most of its approximately 40 employees. The CoinFloor CEO told Financial News that it's normal business practice to adjust staff numbers according to changes in the market environment, and that the exchange has seen a significant change in trading volumes in the market. Cryptocurrencies have crashed in 2018 after the speculative frenzy that fanned a rally last year fizzled amid scrutiny from regulators on the slow pace of institutional adoption of digital assets. And speaking of Bitcoin, coming up, Circle wants to help startups raise cash with crypto and wants to become the go-to platform for token offerings. We'll speak to the CEO of Circle later this hour. Plus, it has been a rocky road to confirmation to the Supreme Court for Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Up next, we are going to take a look at what his addition to the bench means for the issues facing technology. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Earlier in the show, we talked about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's urgent call to phase out fossil fuels. One way to do that is to move quickly towards electric cars. On that note, Audi just unveiled its Tesla Challenger, the e-tron, and one of the most interesting bits of the glitzy launch was its approach to plugging the car in. Audi has teamed up with tech giant Amazon, which will arrange installing home chargers for e-tron buyers. Here to discuss, Nat Bullard, analyst for Bloomberg NEF and contributor to Bloomberg Opinion. So, Nat, Amazon is going to be installing my home charger for my Audi e-tron?
That's right.
So proverbial Audi e-tron, I should say.
Proverbial Audi e-tron. Well, so Amazon is going to use what it calls its home services division to do installation of these chargers. And home services is one that actually, if I confess, I've not ever used before, because it's one of these things for infrequent big purchases, things you might only do once or twice in a home's lifetime, like a refrigerator or a washing machine or a home charger. So what this is doing is removing quite a bit of the friction out of doing something that you don't do that often. So it's an intriguing way to just simplify a process. You might know what charger you want. In fact, I'm sure that Audi would have a preferred set of chargers that's there for any given e-tron purchaser. This just simplifies the process of getting somebody in the home, having them take care of the paperwork, and having them do all the connection for you.
What is the significance of this for Amazon, assuming this is only a teeny tiny little sliver of their business, and for Tesla, for which this is a huge part of their business?
Right. So it's a good question. I'll take the Tesla part first. So for Tesla, and I gave a little talk about this last week at a big conference in London, it was essentially existential, right? You had this chicken and egg problem. You can build great cars, but without a network, you can't really charge them up. And without a bunch of chargers, you're not going to sell a lot of cars. So what Tesla did is simply build the network first. You know, for Amazon, this is far, far different from that in the sense that I doubt this would be materially significant even in any given decade in the future. But what it's intriguing for to me is that it's sort of getting Amazon into the home in yet another way. And
so
it's
you
got
don't
an
think this
intriguing
could
angle
become?
there. Yep.
You don't think this could
Go ahead.
become a much bigger business for Amazon?
So I went with a little thought experiment on it myself, which was, you know, last week, or a couple weeks ago rather, Amazon released a whole slew of new Alexa connected gadgets, and one of them was a microwave. And what struck me about that is that it simplifies a process that is full of menus, options, opaque attempts to do something, and replaces it with just, Alexa, there's a slice of pizza in there, heat it up for me. And my thinking was electric charging is another thing very similar to that. It's got a lot of latency in it in the sense that you've got some time involved. There's a bunch of decisions you might need to make to optimize, but you probably don't want to do. And my thinking was, let's say that Amazon rolls out its own charger in the future. And let's say you just drive in there, plug in, and say, Amazon, I'm not going out, or Alexa, I'm not going out tonight, charge me up. And then let's imagine further that it's, say, all you want charging just as part of your Prime account, or something like that.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Matt Bullard, analyst for Bloomberg NEF, contributor to Bloomberg Opinion. Thank you so much for weighing in. Well, after one of the most contentious confirmation battles in American history, Justice Brett Kavanaugh has been sworn in and is already set to start hearing his first cases. So, are some of the high-level issues impacting technology? How will Kavanaugh's appointment sway the court's decisions? To talk about this, we have our Bloomberg Intelligence litigation analyst, Matt Larson. So, Matt, this is still fresh for a lot of people, but whether you like it or not, he's sworn in. He's going to be hearing a case this week. What are some of the issues facing tech that he will be hearing, and how do we expect him to rule, whether it's privacy or net neutrality or IP?
Yeah, I think you touched on some of the big issues. You know, when you think of tech, privacy is a big one. The balance between government interests in security and individuals' right to protect their data and their own privacy. It's an issue that a lot of tech companies are grappling with now. Another one impacting tech and kind of the gig economy comes in the form of employment and labor issues, as we're moving from kind of a traditional employer-employee relationship to a lot of companies. You think of like the Ubers, the Lyfts of the world, where companies are contracting with individuals who are, you know, just kind of working on a gig per gig basis. What does that mean for things like arbitration agreements? What does it mean for compensation? A whole slew of issues, and there are obviously discrimination issues that come up as tech and just the larger economy deals with wage discrepancies, with a whole host of different issues that impact different groups, you know, to different extents.
So, if Justice Kennedy was the swing vote, whether he was always in every case, you know, he certainly was sometimes, how will Justice Kavanaugh be different?
Yeah, I think the way that a lot of people viewed the Supreme Court, and which falls in line with the way that it rules, is Kennedy was was kind of the center, the ideological center of the court, and he would sometimes side with one side, or the conservative side, or sometimes he would side with the liberal bloc, just depending on the issues and the cases. With Kavanaugh, it's certainly anticipated to be a shift to the right. But that being said, it's not as far right as some of the potential candidates that were out there. So when you look at his history on the D.C. circuit, a lot of commentators point out that he frequently ruled in line with Merrick Garland, who was stymied last time around. There is some middle ground. His colleagues, in terms of his jurisprudence, are largely complimentary of his willingness to consider other sides. So, you know, for those concerned, there is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, and that he seems to be thoughtful. I think last time we discussed, even David Kirkpatrick pointed out that he is at least a little bit more academic, or pretty considerate in writing his opinion. So there is some hope that his presence on the court may not be as far right as anticipated by some groups.
What about when it comes to women? You know, obviously we know about the allegations and the last couple of weeks, but Google, for example, the Department of Labor has a big investigation into pay discrimination against female employees. You had Susan Fowler asking the Supreme Court to consider or reconsider its position on arbitration clauses, which basically requires sexual harassment and assault cases to be settled in private. How will Justice Kavanaugh rule on women's issues?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I kind of take two perspectives on that. One is looking through his history on the D.C. circuit and how he ruled in the past on arbitration-related cases or on labor-related cases, kind of the bull and the bear case, I guess you could call it. So he is traditionally ruled fairly pro-employer, reading limitations.
Pro-employer.
Pro-employer.
Okay.
So limits that are placed on what employers can do, he tends to interpret very narrowly when it comes to reviewing decisions that come out of arbitration or labor review board decisions. Again, he tends to be fairly pro-employer, but not in all cases. And I'll also note that in a lot of these decisions, they're either unanimous or there will be a concurring opinion. So it's not like he's necessarily way outside of the norm, but he is pro-employer. When you look at discrimination cases, this is where it tends to get a little bit dicier, even with the arbitration, is for a lot of these groups and for a lot of women's issues is banding together and being able to operate as a collective voice is beneficial when pushing back against policies that are potentially discriminatory. Stances on the anti-arbitration provisions, things like that, kind of separate out voices and force a situation where you have to litigate those issues on an individual basis in arbitration rather than pull together a class action. So, that's the bear case. On the bull case, Kavanaugh has touted his credentials, his hiring of female clerks, which
just hired four.
His hired four,
team.
and if you anticipate that, inside baseball, the clerks are primarily responsible for writing first drafts of the opinions, for pitching ideas. I think there's at least some optimism that will influence decisions down the road. And also, there have been some studies that take a look at conservative justices and how they rule on social issues based on their own kids. And so, as one study put out, is having girls actually tends to push Kavanaugh or similar justices a little bit further to the progressive side when you're looking at health issues or things like that. So it's yet to be seen exactly how he'll rule. Some justices turn left, some turn right once they get on the court. But kind of in the wake of a difficult weekend for a lot of people, I think there is some hope that it's not going to be the doomsday scenario that was painted. But it's yet to be seen how things will play out.
Well, and he pointed out that he has daughters many times. Lots of women, lots of people will be looking at these decisions very closely. Matt Larson, Bloomberg Intelligence, thanks so much for stopping by. Coming up, it is blockchain week in San Francisco, and the big question is, will cryptos ever be able to bounce back? We'll talk about that in the current landscape of ICOs next. This is Bloomberg. This week, San Francisco is hosting Blockchain Week, bringing together consumers and developers in hopes to push the boundaries of blockchain innovation. We've talked about blockchain and the ever-changing landscape of cryptocurrencies quite a bit this year, and especially since cryptos haven't quite recovered from their December highs. One man who knows the ever-changing landscape of cryptos, CoinList president Andy Bromberg. CoinList is where digital asset companies manage their token sales. Prior to CoinList, Andy was CEO of Sidewire and co-founded the Stanford Bitcoin Group. He joins me now here in the studio. So you're helping companies with ICOs, and the landscape has shifted very dramatically. What are the trends you're seeing? Can the ICO market recover?
I think the ICO market can absolutely recover. What we saw last year was the ICO market really starting. This was 2017. And there was kind of this furor. All of a sudden it exploded. And I think that was a combination of institutional investors and really smart crypto investors getting involved. But then this retail hype that started to build around it was an accelerant, like a yeast that made the whole space explode. And what we saw was that was unsustainable at that time. And the technology wasn't being developed fast enough to support that interest. So we saw a crash. And now we're seeing it slowly rise again as people get more sophisticated about the diligence they do. Now they understand which of these projects are going to be successful.
So how are ICOs different today than they were last year?
I don't think ICOs are that different today than they were last year. I think what's different is the investors. There are more investors with more sophistication coming into the space, and the existing investors are getting more and more sophisticated about the space. But the ICOs are similar. They're structured pretty similarly. There are slight changes. Some of them are raising smaller amounts. or raising over a longer period of time. But at the end of the day, it's still the same type of project raising money, and it's more about investors understanding which of these are good and which are bad, because at the end of the day, so many of these projects are low quality, a massive percentage of them, and you really have to make sure you're filtering out those bad ones before investing in the good ones.
Massive percentage. This as regulators in the UK and the US are considering how this space should be regulated. What kind of regulation are you expecting, and what kind of regulation do you hope for?
I think the big issue, at least in the ICO space specifically, is the issues of securities law. Are what these people are selling securities, or are they not securities? And our perspective is generally that at the time of the sale, almost all of these are securities and need to be regulated as such. That's a well-trod, well-lit industry, selling securities and buying securities, and there's lots of regulation around that today. I don't think it has to be different for the ICO industry. There are some changes that will happen around the specifics there, but at the, when you look at it as a whole, we've been selling securities in the US, private securities, for decades, and it's not going to change that much as we call it a token instead of a convertible note or anything else.
Are we at a new normal, or do you see the potential for this route to return?
I think it's such a cyclical industry at this point. We don't know what's going to happen yet, and it's so immature. So we've got to wait for this ecosystem to develop. At this point, it's still incredibly risky to invest in this space. You've got to make sure you're doing your diligence, and we'll see ups and downs over the next couple of years as the space matures and as technologies actually ship and start to be used for the first time.
So Bitcoin is trading in a really tight range right now. Do you think that will continue?
I think Bitcoin has started to stabilize a little bit more. What we saw until basically a couple months ago was that every single asset in the crypto space was highly correlated. Bitcoin was highly correlated with Ethereum and highly correlated with basically every other asset. Bitcoin has started to become slightly detached from the rest of the assets, which to me means that it's starting to develop its own fundamental value separate from just the hype around the crypto space. And evaluating that has become easier than evaluating some of these other projects.
All right, Andy Bromberg, president of CoinList, thank you so much.
Thank you
for stopping by. Sticking with blockchain and crypto, one company making headlines is Circle Internet Financial. The company is considered one of the most valuable U.S. cryptocurrency marketplaces and has now agreed to acquire crowdfunding firm Seed Invest. This coming as Circle seeks to help startups issue digital tokens and how it allow its own customers to trade a wider variety of coins. For more, we're joined by Circle CEO Jeremy Allaire. So, Jeremy, I'm sure you've been listening into the conversation with Andy. Would you agree that ICOs aren't much different today than they were yesterday, but that this period of great volatility is potentially behind us?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think one critical difference is that there's dramatically fewer ICOs going on, and I think that's a result of a couple of things. One has been a increased amount of regulatory scrutiny around offerings and enforcement actions that have been brought upon people who maybe did illegal securities offerings or were outright committing fraud. The other, obviously, is that the vast majority of projects that did raise capital have seen their values come down pretty dramatically, and so both of those have I think reduced the number of token offerings. But I think for us, this is a really critical period. There's an incredible amount of infrastructure that is maturing, and our belief is that tokenized assets, so using cryptographic tokens and smart contracts to create new types of assets, is going to continue to grow. And in fact, we think over time there will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tokenized assets that people are issuing, trading, and exchanging all around the world.
So why Seed Invest?
Well, when you look at our long-term vision, we acquired a popular crypto exchange earlier this year, Poloniex, and when we acquired that exchange, we made it very clear that our long-term vision is to build a kind of token marketplace where a kind of multi-sided marketplace where businesses and eventually even individuals can issue and distribute tokenized assets, and then to provide a market for those to be able to be easily traded and exchanged. There's some really key missing pieces to really fulfill that vision. One is a lot of these tokens that are going to be offered are going to be securities, and so we needed to be able to operate a broker-dealer and operate within the regulatory framework of the SEC. So Seed Invest owns and operates a broker-dealer and have been really at the forefront of crowdfunding models and issuing and raising capital directly from investors using securities over the internet for the last 5 years. They helped create the Jobs Act. They helped launch many of the first equity crowdfunding models, including from unaccredited investors, which is part of the democratization of the finance that gets people so excited about things like token offerings, but doing that within this regulated securities space. And then the other is, they built out an end-to-end platform to help businesses, to assess businesses, to underwrite them, to manage their security offering, to do the kind of marketing and distribution that's needed to help generate awareness and find investors. And those are all capabilities that we want to be able to have as we build out this multi-sided marketplace for the tokenization of assets.
Do you see this bringing on more accredited investors or retail investors?
The power of tokenization is that, more and more types of assets can be represented in a liquid tradable form. It's also very powerful because, in theory, it creates a way for smaller businesses and mid-sized businesses to more directly raise capital. And I think part of the benefit is that you can make those assets available through global markets over the internet and make those available not just to accredited investors, but also to Main Street investors and unaccredited investors. And that's something that Seed Invest, I think, really pioneered, is a self-service model for supporting offerings to unaccredited investors using the Jobs Act framework that's already in place for crowdfunding and different types of securities offerings. And so being able to apply that also in the crypto sphere is really valuable and important.
All right. Circle CEO Jeremy Allaire, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, Razer is already leading the gaming gear industry with everything from gaming laptops to a gaming credit service. Now it's expanding further into mobile devices. Next, this is Bloomberg. By 2022, esports is expected to reach over 276 million people worldwide. And game gear maker Razer is capitalizing on that growth. Since 2005, Razer has designed and built what it says is the world's largest gamer-focused ecosystem, offering a range of hardware, software, and services. Razer's products include everything from gaming headphones and wireless routers to a virtual credit service for gamers. And now the San Francisco and Singapore dual-headquartered company is set to release its second mobile device. Razer CEO Min Liang Tang joins us now from LA to tell us more. So, Min, obviously the device space is dominated by Apple and Samsung and a host of Chinese hardware makers. What will set yours apart?
Well, in short, our focus is just on the gamers out there, and there are 2.35 billion gamers out there. So right from the outset, I think ourselves, we started with this kind of laser focus on the gamers out there, whether it would be peripherals, hardware, software services, and that's really our focus. The differentiation is really this focus on the gamers.
So you're expected to announce a new mobile device in a matter of days. What can you tell us about it?
Well, I can't really talk too much about it, but it's going to be a mobile-focused event on 10th of October. We'll be streaming it live, whether it's on our social media channels, on Twitch, so on and so forth. Well, just about last year when we announced our first mobile device, we got a huge amount of attention. It was a critical and commercial success. So hopefully we're going to be able to replicate it again this year. So
how big do you see the esports space growing, and how big a part of that growth will be coming from China?
Well, we are one of the pioneers of esports back in the early days. It's been our DNA. I used to be a semi-competitive gamer back then. And we've seen the whole growth, I think, in terms of esports throughout the world. In the US, I think right in the get-go, it was like places like Korea, which was the mecca of esports for a very long time. Now, China has seen explosive growth. The streaming services like Huya, a variety of different ways in which monetization is being done in terms of esports. We just see this growing all the time. We are seeing the numbers go through the roof, and we expect exponential growth to come everywhere, be it in the US, Europe, or China.
The Chinese government has been cracking down on the gaming industry over concerns about gaming addiction. What impact do you expect that will have on your company, on the growth of the market in general?
So, I can't talk too much about the acts of the Chinese government in terms in this space, but what I can say is that we actually run one of the biggest monetization platforms for emerging markets. It's a virtual credit that we provide that connects to multiple games, and we've been seeing a lot of Chinese companies, I think, come down to the emerging markets of Southeast Asia, Latin America, so on and so forth. So, for example, we just announced our partnership with PUBG Mobile, and we're helping them monetize in Southeast Asia. So what we do is to provide them that virtual credit that is used by gamers all around the world, and we're seeing a lot of growth of Chinese companies coming outside of China.
As a former competitive gamer yourself, are you concerned about gaming addiction, and what is Razer planning to do about it?
Well, I think we've seen negativity on all forms of entertainment, I think back in the early days, whether it's TV, film, movies, so on and so forth. So I think it's all about moderation, and that's something we encourage all gamers to do. Now, I think the thing about gaming is that it's one of the most interactive forms of entertainment. So it always gets to be a little bit more engaging, immersive along the way, but moderation, that's really the key.
All right. Razer CEO Min Liang Tan, thank you so much for stopping by. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. We are going to have full coverage of Google's launch event, where we are anticipating announcements on a new phone and may even get some more clarity on that privacy security flaw we talked about earlier in the show. That's tomorrow. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.